This week on Mini Scroll, we're celebrating International Women's Day by spotlighting female-founded brands. And today, we're talking about Frank Body. You probably remember Frank's OG coffee scrub, the internet's favorite shower product since 2013. But if coffee made Frank famous, then glycolic makes Frank iconic. The teal tub is packed with acids and actives to banish bumps all over, selling out 5 times and becoming a go-to for smooth, blemish-free skin. Frank Body is giving Mini Scroll listeners 20% off their next order. Just use code FrankScroll at checkout. The offer expires March 31st. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mini Scroll, the daily internet culture podcast, bringing you the biggest stories from social media, the creator economy, and the digital space every Monday through Thursday. I'm your host, Lauren Meisner, the founder of the youth digital media brand, Centennial World. Welcome back to Mini Scroll, everyone. Okay, I've moved the microphone. I'm very confused. Some of you guys say that there's mouth sounds, and then like an overwhelming amount of you guys say that there's not. But I have moved the microphone. I have changed positioning. So far, I think that this is maybe the best we can do. I'm going to buy one of those like muffler things for the microphone as well. I just haven't got around to it. But I think this could be better. And before we start, I would love if some of you guys who work in social, in marketing, in talent management, or if you own a brand and you're interested in influencer marketing and the creator economy and stuff like that, if you guys could fill out a research survey that I am doing. This is going to help inform kind of an offshoot, possibly, of the brand. I'm working on something pretty big. I'm very much in the ideation stage, so I'm looking for as much market research as possible. So if you guys listen to this podcast to stay up to date and it helps you with your job, could you please click the type form in the description box? I'm trying to get at least 100 people to give us feedback. Obviously, the more the better, but I'm trying to get at least 100 so I can get like a proper gauge on this. It would be so helpful if you listen to this podcast and other people that you know work in these industries and you think that their feedback could be helpful. Can you share it with them? That would be so helpful. Thank you. All right, let's get into the stories for today. So the first story that I have for you guys is that Rosanna Pansino has addressed Tana Mongeau and Trisha Paytas and their friendship backlash saga. So Rosanna Pansino has made a follow-up podcast episode addressing the backlash she received last week when talking about 2 topics. First, Tana Mongeau's experience on Escape the Night, the movie, and second, Tana and Trisha Paytas' reaction to Rosanna, quote-unquote, smoking her father's ashes. I'm not going to go into the details because I literally just covered this in, I think, our very last mini scroll, I think Thursday. But Rosanna basically tried to debunk a lot of Tana's claims about her experience on Escape the Night, the movie set. And she also thought that on several different podcast episodes, Tana and Trisha were mocking her for smoking cannabis that was grown in a pot that was mixed with her father's ashes. So Rosanna came out with this podcast episode alongside her partner, and they basically tried to respond to these things. And it didn't really go over very well for people. The main backlash was that Rosanna was minimizing Tana's experience. So here is what Rosanna came back with. She released her own episode solo over the weekend, and here is what her response was.
I believe Tana when she said that a guy said something inappropriate to her on set of Escape the Night. When she told me on set, I fully had her back and I said, I'm so sorry that happened to you and you should tell Joey. Me criticizing and fact-checking the other things that she was saying on the podcast was in no way intended to claim that she was lying about being harassed. The reason that I spoke out about this is because I felt Tana was associating many innocent people with the very harmful actions of one individual. Her claims that the entire crew were like old, creepy men is just harmful because the crew is a mix of men and women whose livelihoods depend on their reputation. They don't have a big platform to speak up for themselves. This, what I'm about to talk about right now, is a separate issue. It has nothing to do with Escape the Night or being on set. Canceled podcast, Tana talks so negatively about how I honored my dad that it triggered me. I still deeply feel the loss of my dad, and for her and Brooke and Paige to put it out there that it was illegal, insinuating that I'm a criminal and that I was a cannibal, completely devastated me. Like, I thought Tana and I were friends.
So I will say from the beginning, she did say she believes Tana about the creepy guy on set. However, then her and her partner in that initial podcast episode, like, went in on all these times that Tana has, like, quote unquote, lied over the years or like embellished things. And they were trying to say it's hard to believe her about the bigger things when she embellishes about the smaller things at the same time as saying they believe her. So it was just very contradictory, and that's what a lot of people had an issue with. I totally agree with Rosanna's sentiment that innocent people will get dragged into this by Tana painting like the entire crew with the same brush. But I think Rosanna has built this like second wave in her career for herself by exposing how horrible it is to work for Mr. Beast, right? And how difficult it is to be on set with the team and all of that. And those exposés that she does, that's going to include a ton of people that are innocent as well. Because even if she tries to make that differentiation in her exposés and all of her coverage around Mr. Beast and Beast Games, like at the end of the day, even if you told me you worked on Beast Games, I'm gonna feel a certain type of way about you. And that's not to say that her work isn't important. You guys know how I feel about Mr. Beast. I think it's really important that we are looking into these people that hold so much power and have this very like questionable reputation, you know? So I think the work that she is doing around Mr. Beast can be important, but I also think it's ironic that she's coming on here and saying, you know, she's going on this like crusade against Tana's experience on Escape the Night because she's worried for the cast and crew and how they're going to be perceived if Tana's saying like, oh, they all were, you know, creepy, or it was like all a bad experience or whatever. And it's like, well, the same could also probably be true for how she's framing all of the Mr. Beast stuff. That's my opinion, at least. Okay, the next story that I have for you guys is that Berner has apologized to Meghan Thee Stallion after her red carpet microaggression. This is another follow-up story from last week, but Berner, podcaster, comedian, former Summer House star, has apologized to Meghan Thee Stallion for the racist microaggression that she made while interviewing her on the Vanity Fair Oscar red carpet. So she wrote on Instagram stories, and she also made a statement at the start of her podcast, Giggly Squad. This is what it said. Interviewing Meghan Thee Stallion was a dream of mine. I love her music, and it's my go-to whenever I need to boost my confidence before a show. Looking back at the interview, I wish I used any other word except fight to describe how her songs impact me. As we know, she said, your songs make me want to fight. It was a careless choice of words, and though there was no ill intent, I recognize and acknowledge that what I said has a deeper meaning, and I am so sorry to Meghan. I appreciate everyone who brought this to my attention. Okay, I'm not really going to share how I feel about that apology because it's definitely not my apology to accept. So I wanted to talk about the point that I've seen around this, which is like that influencers are not journalists. They shouldn't be replacing journalists on the red carpet. And I don't fully agree with this. I think hosting, interviewing, especially live, I think is a skill that tons of journalists don't have. It's actually so challenging. I struggle with it so much. I've had a few opportunities, you guys know, to do red carpet coverage or even like live interviews with people that are kind of big celebrities. And it's a huge challenge. It's a very difficult skill to hone. And I think some people have it and some people don't. And I don't think that there's a lot of journalists, even if they are trained in broadcast journalism, that necessarily like have it. And I think there's probably a lot of influencers. I mean, there's just going to be a lot of people in general that like would have it. So I don't necessarily agree with that. Although I do think when the interview happened, people are like, these girls need media training. And I think maybe that would have been helpful. Some training in terms of like how to navigate, I guess, your emotional regulation in a situation like that, how to think on your feet and pivot conversations and recover if you do make a mistake and things like that. So I don't necessarily think that it can only be a journalist's job to do like those hosting things, those interviews. But I think at the end of the day, it is clear that Hannah and a little bit of Paige, but like definitely Hannah, she needs some training of some sort if they're going to do that again. It was so like chaotic and, like I said before, you could tell that they really were trying to make it like about them. And I think that's a hard line to figure out when you are talent as well. Like, they are podcasters, they are famous, people tune into their podcast for them, people are tuning in to that interview for them because that's why Vanity Fair chose them. And Drew Afualo actually made a video about this whole situation a few days ago, so I'm going to insert a little clip here because I agree with exactly what she said.
There are many journalists I know personally and have met over the years that cannot talk to a person on camera to save their fucking life, which is hosting. And the same goes for influencers. Just because they've built a platform doesn't mean they can talk to people on carpets. Does that make sense? We're talking about a real squares and rectangle situation. You know what I'm saying? They're two very different things. Hosting is a skill.
Okay, the last story that I have for you guys is I need to talk about this comparison that is literally all over the internet right now. It started on TikTok, like honestly a day or two ago, very, very recently, but now it is like everywhere. And it's the fact that people are comparing or debating whether you can compare female snarkers to male incels. So, like I said, this comparison was first brought to TikTok over the weekend by a creator named Josie and has since sparked a very heated debate across many corners of the internet.
I'm starting to worry that Reddit snarkers are becoming a kind of female version of incels, and not like incels in like the direct term of it, but just as a very socially dysfunctional online behavior, mainly displayed by one gender. You know, I like obviously incels, very different vibe, very different focus, but you know what I mean? Kind of two sides of the same coin here. And I do think we need to spend a little more time actively shaming people who are participating in these Reddit forums with weird, destructive, antisocial behavior. And snark is a mainly woman thing because, you know, ladies like to gossip. I just want you to know, if you participate in these Reddit forums, there's no way for that not to be corrosive to your personality and how you think about yourself and how you treat the people in your real life. If you think this way about strangers that you don't know with such like callousness, and this is how you think about people, it's not something that you are capable of compartmentalizing to just online. This is a mindset that you are going to adopt to everybody in the world, and that's going to make you a really rotten person on the inside. So seek help.
So if you guys listen to this podcast, you know this debate encompasses so much of what we frequently talk about on this podcast. The manosphere and like snark and gossipy pop culture. So I wanted to give my 2 cents on this, and I'm so interested to hear what you guys have to say. I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong answer because it's incredibly nuanced. However, here's my take on this. So I understand the comparison. I see that incels and snarkers are both like grievance and shame-based communities, quote unquote. But I think there are a few caveats here when comparing the two. Snark can be undoubtedly damaging in many ways. It can be damaging to the people being snarked about. It can be damaging to users consuming the snark. It can be damaging to people participating in the snark, and just to the wider culture online of like what we deem as acceptable and unacceptable criticism or feedback of a public figure online. But I would still argue that the outcomes of snark are not as widely damaging as the outcomes of incel culture. Another interesting thing to note. So I was talking to my friend Crystal, who runs ZFeed, and she pointed me to some research about trolls. They did a piece in 2021, I think, on like why people troll and how you can hopefully get it to stop. And I wanted to kind of touch on that. So obviously trolling and snarking are not exactly the same thing, but they're similar. So I'm going to use trolling as a bit of like a framework here because there honestly isn't a lot of research yet on snark specifically. But this research that she pointed me to found that while online trolling may feel pervasive, it's actually not as common as it seems because there's not actually that many people who troll. It's more that the people who do troll do it a lot. So I would think it's the same for snark. I follow a few snark pages for general collectives to help me like find stories for Minnie, obviously. I don't follow snark pages like about people specifically, about like specific influencers and stuff. So I'm not like super well versed in those. But my experience in following snark pages from that, I would say about 70% of the posts are either like valid criticism or they're posts about something relatively harmless or mundane. And then I would say the other like 20 to 30% are really nasty, like they're body shaming or they're doxing, or it's like really unhinged criticism that makes no sense and it just feels really, really mean. And I don't know for sure, but I would hypothesize that that 20 to 30% of snark that is really, really bad is done by the same small percentage of people. Because I think there are also similarities between how women enter snark communities and men enter incel communities. We know from anecdotal evidence that a lot of men don't intentionally enter incel communities. Rather, they get drawn in when they're looking for advice on how to like improve themselves, or they're looking for a place to make connection with other men. You know, men are not socialized to ask for help, especially around things that are deemed shameful in male spaces like mental health. And they're not taught how to build strong interpersonal connections kind of in the same way that women are. Like, we know these things, right? And I believe that's similar to women who snark. I think a lot of women who are in snark communities, they end up there because they are seeking a place to talk about like niche celebrities or influencers or topics around pop culture, which is why a lot of snark pages are dedicated to like very random creators. Like, you don't see a lot of snark pages dedicated to giant celebrities. I think it can happen because you follow this one creator, you have maybe a bit of a parasocial relationship with them or like a parasocial hatred of them. And no one else you know in real life follows them. So you search their name, you go on Reddit, and then suddenly you're in their snark page, And so I think that's how you can kind of keep tabs on this interest that you have in this like niche area that you can't really speak about with other people in your circle because maybe they don't follow them or maybe they just don't care as much. I think part of womanhood also is like crowdsourcing opinions and information and feedback on people that you follow, content you consume. I think that's part of it. I think that's how some women get into like the snark realm, the snark community. And honestly, same, like if there's ever a scandal that goes on or something with like a podcaster or an influencer or whatever, like I will go to Reddit and I just want to see what people are saying. Like I think that's human nature, you know? I also think another element to this, kind of going back to men being not socialized to like talk about mental health, share their feelings, build those communities. Women are socialized to be polite. We're socialized to be seen and not heard. We're socialized to not be judgmental. So I think similar to how incel communities appeal to men, even if they like don't want to be an incel, even if they don't identify as an incel, these communities might appeal to men who are seeking information or community around topics that are like quote unquote shameful in male spaces. Gossip and being totally polite towards people and seen and not heard and all of these things that I just mentioned about women, like there's a lot of shame around not being those in female dominated or women dominated spaces. So I don't think a lot of women seek out snark communities to tear people apart, which is why now like this conversation has obviously made it to a lot of snark pages, and like the comments of course are overwhelmingly saying like this is not why I snark. Like this is actually such a misrepresentation of what I do in this community or why I've joined this community or whatever. I don't think these women join these communities to necessarily tear people apart and body shame them and like all these like really toxic things that can happen, but I think there is absolutely a pipeline. Just as we have a lot of anecdotes of men who seek these communities, get into them, and then they realize, oh wait, this is like not what I wanted, or like this is way more extreme than I thought, and they leave them. There are a lot of women that I would say are probably passive snarkers. They don't post or they just don't ever engage in anything like really hateful or toxic. There's also a lot of like interpolicing, like snark on snark policing in these communities, which actually could make for an interesting deep dive episode. Let me know if you guys want that. And there's women, of course, that end up leaving these communities being like, this is not what I signed up for. And there's different platforms that are meaner than others, you know? There's kind of like those OG blogging platforms about influencers that are so much more savage, in my opinion, than snark Reddits. So anyways, my last kind of point to tie this all together is, you know, there is a lot of discussion now because there's lots of people talking about snark. Like it's starting to get some like mainstream coverage. The discussion, of course, is like, well, women are overwhelmingly snarkers. Women are overwhelmingly snarked about and overwhelmingly snarkers as opposed to men. Like, why is that? I think there's a multitude of reasons for that, but I think part of it, kind of tying it back to everything that I just hypothesized. Again, this is all just like my own theories. I don't have a lot of evidence to back any of this up, okay? So let me know your opinions. But I feel like snark is women's way to troll. And I think there's probably, and I don't know this for sure, but I'm going to guess based on living on the internet that most trolls, like outward trolls in the comments, in the DMs, are men. And I think, of course, most snarkers are women. And I think that kind of ties back to what I was saying before, is that men are socialized differently to women. Women, there is a lot of shame around being mean and rude and not polite and speaking your opinion. And there's not that same level of shame for men. So I think men feel, less shame, just full stop, around being a public troll. I also think, of course, women just have more empathy and more emotional intelligence a lot of the time. But if you were going to, say something mean about an influencer, I assume the reason why more women choose snark is because it is a more like behind the scenes way to do it, like a safer space to do it. You don't have to do it publicly where you have that element of shame. But let me know what you guys think about that. I think I could literally talk about this discussion for the rest of my life. I'm so fascinated by it. Those are just all of my high level thoughts that I had today, but let me know what you guys are thinking. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for listening. I love you guys. Please rate, review, and subscribe. It helps us so much. It helps us grow. Please do the type form in the description. It would help us so much as well. We are trying to do some research. I love you guys, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Bye.